Good evening from New York. Breaking news tonight about the breaking down of negotiations between the White House and Congress over the FISA laws and the urgent issue of vacation. President Bush took more vacation in 3 years than did his predecessor in 7. He was on vacation when a briefing crossed his desk entitled "Bin Laden Determined to Attack in U.S." He is still sending American troops to die in a country whose parliament has just gone on vacation in the middle of a civil war. But in our fifth story on the countdown tonight, the president's now threatening to stop Congress from taking its vacation if it does not give him the right to spy on you, whether you're on vacation or not, as he wishes. Specifically, Mr. Bush today demanded a rubber stamp on his own proposal to modernize the 1978 Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, FISA. And much as he keeps pointing to General Petraeus as his point person in Iraq, the president claims that the Director of National Intelligence, Mike McConnell, will guide him in dealing with any congressional compromise.
Is this what you need to do your job, Mr. DNI? That's the question I want to ask. And if the answer is yes, I'll sign the bill. And if the answer is no, I'm going to veto the bill. And so far, the Democrats in Congress have not drafted a bill I could sign.
All sides agree that FISA law is outdated, but not everyone agrees with the president's demand that the DNI and the Attorney General becoming in charge of deciding who to target with surveillance, while a court would not be able to review their decisions until 120 days after the fact. The disagreement's so sharp that late this evening, negotiations between Congress and the White House broke down, Democrats accusing the administration of reneging on an earlier agreement. As for the reasons behind the original disagreement, the Democrats pointing out that the apparent incompetence and partisanship of the current Attorney General aside, there's also the little issue of checks and balances.
I don't care who the Attorney General is. Attorney General under a Democratic president or a Republican president, it's not appropriate that the same branch of government have all of that power.
The president resorting to a familiar rationale to try to sway people to his will.
It's important for the American people to understand there are cold-blooded killers who want to come to our homeland and wreak havoc through death.
Promptly and properly and newly scared yet? Now for a specific example.
You know, it was a year ago that I met with the counterterrorism team that we worked with Great Britain to uncover an airline plot. A plot that, had it gone forward, would have caused death on a massive scale.
The one with plotters who did not have plane tickets and whose plan to make a liquid bomb midair was virtually impossible to carry out. That plot. No mention from the president of the other country he includes in the war on terror, maybe because even members of his own cabinet now have little good to say about Iraq. Defense Secretary Gates offering a bleak assessment of the political progress the president's surge was meant to foster, telling reporters, quote, "We probably all underestimated the depth of the mistrust and how difficult it would be for these guys to come together on legislation." Because of that underestimation, Mr. Gates appears to be changing the benchmarks for measuring any success. The plan originally shifted away from training Iraqi forces and focused instead on establishing security to give the government breathing space. But now, Gates seems to be advocating a switch back to training. I think the key is, he continues, not only establishing the security, but being able to hold on to those areas and for Iraqi army and police to be able to provide the continuity of security over time. It's under that umbrella I think progress will be made at the national level. We return now to that surveillance bill itself. Mr. Bush's big compromise today was to allow the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court to review his wiretaps, but only, as we mentioned, 4 months after the wiretap, according to the Associated Press, and that not on an individual case-by-case basis, but merely the general process. Mr. Bush claims his legal wunderkind, Mr. Gonzales, is better suited than the judges of the surveillance court to review the individual wiretaps, that Mr. Gonzales can somehow review the wiretaps faster, that Mr. Gonzales can be trusted, that Mr. Gonzales can find his way into the office. The same Mr. Gonzales whose judgment helped craft the original warrantless wiretap program, which a judge had since curtailed. The same Mr. Gonzales who reported to Congress no abuses of the Patriot Act when abuses there were. The same Mr. Gonzales who told Congress there was no dissent about the original wiretapping program when dissent there was. That untruth leading us this week to confirmation by National Intelligence Director McConnell that the president's surveillance program extends considerably beyond those warrantless wiretaps. All of which brings us to Jonathan Turley, professor of constitutional law at George Washington University. Much thanks, as always, for your time tonight, sir.
Hi, Keith.
The Senate Republican whip, Mr. Lott, today warned that without the new surveillance law, the threat of a terrorist strike on Washington is so great that, to quote him, I think it would be good to leave town in August, and it would probably be good to stay out until September 12th. Conversely, Senator Feingold said, I would much rather stay here than have us make a terrible mistake. So setting aside the question of who sounds braver here, which should we be fearing more here? Mr. Lott's hypothetical terrorist strike or the terrible mistake that Mr. Feingold speaks of?
Well, I have to agree with Lott that I think the Republic will be safer if Congress just stays out of town for long periods of time. But I don't think it's anything to do with terrorism. You know, this is part of a cycle here of keeping fear alive, that whenever we get to the question of civil liberties, suddenly Armageddon is just around the corner, and we can protect it only by giving unlimited authority to the president. What the president has offered Congress, frankly, in my view, is outrageous. This idea that Alberto Gonzales is going to review these things. This is the same attorney general in the torture memo who basically said he doesn't read his memos, that he just signed it, and he really wasn't sure what was in it. And as you've noted, he has an incredibly checkered past. And I find it quite astonishing that they would put him forward as a protection of civil liberties.
Well, it's not just a checkered past, it's a checkered right now. On the admission that wiretapping is not the sum of this administration's secret decisions about what it can and cannot do, if we assume Mr. Bush is already doing everything allowed by law, does that mean that we can safely conclude, is this the logical chain here, we can conclude these other activities that we don't really know about are extra legal?
Well, I think that is the problem. What we do know occupies the full extent of what the Constitution would allow, and in my view, beyond it. It's astonishing that we're talking about FISA and the FISA court as this high bar of civil liberties. Before 9/11, many of us were arguing and still argue that a secret court is inimical, is un-American in our system of law. And that's a court that was created to circumvent the Fourth Amendment. The fact that we're struggling to use the FISA court really shows how far we've gone. But the White House has gotten away with this many, many times. They've taken a very extreme position, and the Democrats rush to the middle, wherever that middle may be, to show that they're moderate and that they're not weak on terrorism.
Members of Congress apparently have been briefed on some of these governmental activities. So to what extent is Congress complicit in Mr. Bush's activities?
Well, I'm afraid there is great complicity in all of this for members of Congress. You know, they were, in fact, informed, a small number of them, of the domestic surveillance program, which, in my view, as we've talked before, is a federal crime. You know, it violated expressly the language of federal law. But I think the Democrats and Republicans have a lot to answer for. They have a history of being very, very weak on civil liberties. And this is an example. They're rushing this weekend to create a major piece of legislation that will affect all Americans. Once again, we're going to do this over the course of a weekend so people can go on their vacations and so the president won't call Congress back. Why? Why was such a critical part of what makes this country what it is? Civil liberties has to be done in a rush, in a terror, the way it always is done. That's how we got the Patriot Act. But I think the Democrats are going to march to that tune, and we are likely to come out of this weekend with another bill that endorses the secret court and compromises with this administration. And I expect that the loser will be civil liberties.
And incidentally, the collateral loser on this, the not so innocent bystander, is often these prosecutions. I mean, we learned today that a court had ruled against the Justice Department of Alberto Gonzales concerning its raid, his raid, if you will, of Congressman Jefferson, he of the 90,000 in the freezer frozen funds. He said that taking Mr. Jefferson's legislative files out of his office constituted a breach of the separation of powers. If you couple that with the administration's history about unilateralism on FISA, is there a connected lesson here?
Well, there is. You know, I testified at the House Judiciary hearing after that raid and testified that I thought it was unconstitutional, as did many people. And I think it is a lesson. I mean, Alberto Gonzales is the greatest gift to Congressman Jefferson. He violated the Constitution. We didn't have to. He's delayed the trial. He may have jeopardized evidence. Why is that a function you can keep your job for?
Jonathan Turley, we'll take the weekend off and let the mind stop reeling. Professor at George Washington University. Great thanks, John. Good weekend.
Thanks, Keith.
There appears to be some good news out of Minneapolis tonight. The list of 30 missing